Hey everyone, I hope the sound is fine this time and there's not gonna be any recording issues. Let me know if you can hear me, if you can see me fine. Hope there's no delay. There's usually some technical issues which I need to deal with. I might leave the background music as well just to jazz the things up. Let me know if everything is all good. I see a few people on the chat. Cosnus Beta, Max, Karkin, DDFO. I might butcher your names and nicknames as per usual, but if you can hear me fine and everything is all right, we can start in a few seconds. How is everyone? Let me know in the chat if you're busy with anything this weekend. How was your week? What you're working on? A good hi from Dallas. Hey, Jules or Yules. Nice. And someone from Guatemala as well, Diego. Thanks for joining. We're just starting off, so it's it's gonna be an easy go into it. As you know, we had a few submissions, so it was 4 people who basically submitted interesting case studies and projects, and this is exactly what we're gonna do today. So we're just gonna walk through that and see exactly what we did. Give them feedback, hear feedback from yourself. So if you have anything on your mind, just type in the chat. We can have a quiet, interesting, going basically through those cases, and maybe can learn something yourselves, and also for those who submitted and participated in the actual challenge. And one of the highlights I see from Max is had 2 interviews for UX design this week. Did you interview or did you interview someone else? And how did that go? All right, let's see. I'm gonna come back to a few questions. So if you have anything in the chat, just leave it. We're gonna try to come back to it. It's quite hard to jump back and forth, but right off the bat, if we dive into the specifics of the challenge itself, this challenge was a bit different. Usually we try to be either very specific with the prototyping skills or very holistic with like service or customer experience. This was very specific to product design, because the product in case is this app, the commute from. And if you've seen my brief of the actual challenge, it's an outdated product which is collecting dust basically. And because of that, you can even Google, you can even find articles about it. If someone would just go as a user to it and try to actually, do something, or find the commute times where they could buy a house, let's say, they couldn't be able to do that because it just doesn't work. There is maybe no data connections, maybe APIs are outdated, the technical issues, but more so on the maintenance issues, because the product is just simply not managed or maintained. And given the market directions, if you remember in my brief, there is a big shift from people because of COVID-19, the pandemic, just shifting mindsets, the behaviors. People just generally started to move out of the suburban areas because why wouldn't you, right? Like if you can do your job, let's say remotely, and you can be kind of like, you can basically spend so much more time doing something else than commute, then naturally you might be more inclined to actually find a living place somewhere outside the suburban or metropolitan areas. And that's basically the trend. There's of course the price increases and everything in between, the economic shift, but ultimately people are just simply moving out of metropolitan areas. And so as a kind of like a made-up business owner, I asked you to, go and explore, deconstruct this, do some research, try to actually figure out what would make sense to the users, let's say, what would make sense to this as a business. Maybe consider something more local to you as well, so that you can actually address it properly and, come up with some sort of case study. And the key with those challenges, if you're, very new to this, is it's intended for you to go and explore and make your UX project and document it right, make the evidence required to get that next opportunity or job. It's basically to give you an idea for a side project so that you can enrich your UX portfolio. And then, just working through it, basically come up with something which you can use as a stamp that, hey, I did UX properly. And so we received 4 different case studies, or at least like a stab at the project, basically, because we limited the time to just 1 month. Naturally, people invested, different types of amounts of time, went either very deep into it or quite, shallow, but that's totally fine. It's, again, up to you how you do it, because naturally projects like that would in real life last months, sometimes could last half a year, maybe even years to come, because you would maintain it and iterate it and, of course, update different features, which would add up to an even better user experience, right? So, let me just check really quick the chat before we dive into the actual cases, and I, don't waffle too much. Do we really should make a user persona always by interviewing a real user? This is a big question, but let me see if I can figure out a way to address it really quickly. Yes and no. Your personas are really just a representation of target group, of a user segment, of a user group you want to target. It's a tool for you to communicate your intent. It's a tool for you to focus on someone. It's a tool for you to build alignment with your team, with the stakeholders. It's just a tool which outlines exactly who is that new experience is for, or who is that, redefined experience is for. It's as simple as that. So, usually the personas is, if you don't evolve your personas, if you don't build them up from like 0 to something, they're quite useless, because you can't apply it, you cannot make it actionable. So it's almost like it's a chicken and egg scenario, where you would start at something very high level, and then you build the knowledge. You might do some surveys, some interviews, some other research methods, and kind of build those personas up. Other alternative methods to that could be just starting with a proto-persona, which is rough outline, then creating richer personas, maybe jobs to be done. There is a lot of use cases of how to address it, but short answer, it really depends, but you start somewhere, and as much as you know and as much as you find, you keep on iterating and producing different versions of it, basically. And you, of course, evolving it. It's quite a few questions. And I see Max had an interview. And is it being recorded as well? Yes, you can watch it later, of course. This is going to be, I planned it to make maybe an hour worth of stream if we don't get, too distracted by different bits. But yeah, you can actually watch it, and play back later on as well, or skip the things. And I see other people joining. Cool, let's get started, because I think we might need to race through a few different bits as well. But the first case was submitted actually by one of the people from the Discord community, and it's Get Him Mama from Discord community, one of the members. If you're not a member, by the way, make sure to join it. The link is down below. You can just install Discord app and you're there, basically. No kind of catch to it. And you can then engage with other people, get feedback, make sure to also give feedback, communicate, and chat up. But basically they submitted this case study, or actually like a approach to it, in this Figma slide format. And of course, the format here doesn't really matter so much. I have a few notes exactly what I would improve on it, but let me just walk you through exactly what they submitted. As you can see, it follows a simple and very typical approach to structuring the case studies. There is some sort of outline exactly of why they did what they did. They kind of outline what we did in the request or the challenge itself, that, people are just moving out generally. This is where a few different cases submitted, where I would recommend you to do is actually add a bit of stats to it. Add a bit more detail to it as well. Because if you make these bold statements that people are shifting behaviors, you could back it up with the data. It's going to become much more, evidence-based, much more stronger statement, basically. Other bits as an intro slide, of course, you've shown the old thing. You could literally note down that this is the old product and old experience, adding just a caption to it or something. And one thing, which is my big pet peeve in all the portfolios, is that people add these tools used. Tools don't really matter. Like, don't get bogged down about the tools you used. You can just summarize the tools you're proficient in with, let's say, a resume. You can summarize it in a cover letter. You can summarize it in your portfolio about page. You can just say, I'm proficient at XYZ, and that should apply then to all your work. It shouldn't be a case specific, basically. I don't know. There is differing opinions. And some people are going to tell you that just list it out because it's going to make you kind of like, appear much more knowledgeable. But, the actual experienced hiring managers know what's up. They know that you can learn a tool in a weekend if you really want to. If you learn just like Sketch, it's really easy to pick up Figma. It's like you can learn it over time. You can be almost immediately proficient with Figma. But, I don't want to go on a tangent here because it's one of those things. So also we summarize the timeline. It's 1 month. And that the role was UX designer, which is fine. I mean, you can do role, you can do responsibilities and break down exactly what you did. But let's see exactly what it's like. Let's see. So, and in each slides, which is one of the things what they did, is that we had this flow, basically going step by step, breaking down their approach. One of the things what I guess threw me off a little bit just going through these slides was that, everything kind of flows fine. But then these, for example, design processes, which is good to summarize your approach, could be kind of tied in a little bit better, let's say. Or let's say if you are actually going to use this process, you could actually add a shortcut, let's say, next to your design process and say, I don't know, add a little mini icon that this is from the double diamond, because that's how I presume that, hey, you're introducing me to this approach because you presume that I don't know about UX and you're just going to walk me through segment by segment, right? And of course, I'm not going to go too deep into the actual detail. I just had a look before. But as you can see, what we did is basically outline different deliverables. This is another case with portfolios, is not to get kind of bogged down too much with the deliverables, but focus on the story itself and then add the deliverables to support your story. And as you can see, they say that I started off with the research. So they did some sort of competitive analysis. And of course, I cannot go deep into it, so maybe a link would help actually. And I see that this is a Notion based, right? So you could potentially just I don't know, add a link or describe exactly what did you get out of it, because here it's a prime example. So as you can see, this is a competitive analysis, right? But now if I'm gonna go next, it jumps immediately into the user research, but the link between the two, or how does that permeate, is quite invisible. Maybe it would be good to summarize exactly how those methods overlay each other, basically, just from UX perspective. For me as a hiring manager, that would be so important to understand that you actually know why you do what you do. A lot of people in, especially new to UX, just do competitive analysis like it's, I don't know, bread and butter. They just keep on hammering it and just eating it up, basically, and just producing it, but they don't really know how to apply it. And that's what I want to know. I want to know if you know why you do what you do. That's the most important bit for me to understand if you're a right fit. Let's say, if this case study you're going to use to, let's say, apply for some sort of role, right? And if we go forward, as you can see, we did some sort of introduction to the methods. What I liked about this submission was that we actually summarized the insights. So clearly showing the key insights and the themes, it's great, because we basically went through secondary research of Reddit groups, YouTube videos, blog posts, and more, right, as described in that case study. And then we described the insights, which is basically saying that people move out in late 20s, 40s, when we have families, it's too expensive, people want bigger houses and gardens. So we know that for sure. Maybe stating something extra would also help. For example, why? Why does that happen? You see, in one of the cases you have that when we have families, let's say. But then I would now question if you took that as a basis for your interviews, which is that next step, right? And as you can see, you were able to speak with 3 people one-on-one who had already moved out of a big city to get the insights on the moving process, XYZ. You basically introduce what you did with it and what you wanted to do, and sample questions. So it's great that you just didn't add like a script. Like, what bothers me with, let's say, a typical case studies and portfolios, that people just watch a script and think that it's valuable in any way. Just tell me on a high level what topics, what hypotheses you had. Instead of adding the questions, you could just mark, this is the hypothesis I try to like prove or disprove or learn about, right? It would be as simple as that. And then a high level insights, as a summary, you say that people knew a little bit about surrounding areas, but not enough to make a decision on where to move. All people interviewed were expected to commute back into the city at least a few days a week for work. That's interesting. All people said it would have been nice to have a better commuting calculation tool. So I guess these are where your hypotheses you try to do when you say all people, means that it came from some sort of assumption or informed guess that this could be it. And then you try to, this is something you could actually clarify and make it much more clear. And I see a lot of people are joining. Welcome, welcome. If you are a bit late, it's totally fine. You can, watch a recording. This is going to be recorded and you can like play back after the actual live stream. But I'm just going through the first case study, and you see this is where I would be a bit kind of like taken aback if the knowledge transfers again step to step and how it overlays. If you say that if you got just 3 insights, I would be very suspicious. I would want to know how much more insights you got. Or maybe even when you say, for example, that all people interviewed said that, you could support it with a few statements. Maybe add a quote. As simple as it sounds, or as cheap of a point it is, it illustrates for me as a hiring manager better that you actually that this statement of yours, that all people interviewed were expected, actually sticks. And there is some sort of like, empathy-driven emotional response which you captured from behavioral side. And of course, attitudes and everything in between, depending on your methods. But from user interviews, because it's such a mixed method, you can just find out so much and you can capture that. And then you went into definition. I think you just described it like what the steps you took, the proto-personas. And this is what I noted down, by the way, as one of the feedback notes. So Get Him Mama from Discord basically made one persona summarizing what that actual user is, and then the anti-persona. And this is interesting because both of them are kind of like a proto-persona style types and ways to represent. A big question is, how did you narrow it down just to one persona, and why? I might introduce you, like we might like get you into interview, right, and to come in, and you might walk me through your case study. I would be very specifically asking you, how did you segment those people? Because you interviewed 3 people, if I noticed correctly from a previous slide, right? And then you just came up with one persona. If you come up with just one persona, it could mean just I guess 2 things, maybe 3 things. But one of them is going to be that persona is way too generic and too general of a themes captured. Or 2 means that you didn't interview enough people. And I know that you also have that one which is anti-persona, but then I would question, is it something you discovered by like background research? How did you arrive at that, basically? That would be a main question. I think it's very interesting to add that type of approach of actually adding anti-personas, because you know who you're not going to target, but just make sure to describe how did you decide on this and why did you, how did you come up to this, basically. So some segmentation might help. Even if you just interview a few people, the behaviors, the attitudes, they might match on a high level, but on a deep down, it could be different. Maybe the challenge they use to do what we do right now is different. Like, for example, I didn't see, which is next bit, but it's the user journey, right? And this is based on the research, so it's as is user journey. But when you summarized three people's worth for one persona, all of this, so it might be lacking just a little bit of depth, because you kind of just branched it out and broke it down based on just a few insights basically. So the only thing, or the only call to action here, would be to deep dive just a little bit more. And kind of try to do a bit more research, I guess, because your user base naturally are going to expand. If you're so narrow, going back to the actual problem statement, to the actual product itself, that tool was almost like designed for anyone. There was no UX done right. Now you're UXing and you're kind of like saying, this is just one person we're targeting with these specific attributes, these specific behaviors and goals and attitudes towards the tech, let's say, or that experience touch point. I would be very, very careful with that, because there's always, more things to consider, or like the market to consider. Like none of the business stakeholders just gonna want to address one specific, like super specific behaviors or attitudes from a user perspective. How might we? So you basically went through ideations, came up with some ideas exactly of what you could be doing. This is where I would link it back to the pain points, I would link it back to the challenges, I would link it back to something like negative, because you use how might we to paraphrase the negatives into the positives, to make your questions you can answer with ideas, to come up with a set of like a list of different things you could be doing, so you can then prioritize and actually action it in the end. So again, jumping from one deliverable to the other is going to definitely disfavor you, especially if you would apply for more senior roles. You need to tell a good story first and foremost, and then add that as an example, let's say, if that's the approach you want to take. And I see there is a chatter in the chat. I'm going to jump in the chat again in a sec, just to see what you're saying. Just to finish off this case, though, let's go. You prioritize using a Kano or Kano model. And the interesting bit here was that all those ideas from how might we's were prioritized by not implemented and implemented, which is like if you could attach a big question mark next to my head right now, this would be it. Because I would kind of question, what does that really mean? Do you mean the tech feasibility, that you cannot implement something and you can implement? Do you mean the complexity and a budget would require from tech side? What does this estimate basically? And the satisfaction is great. So I guess this is high satisfaction, and down below you have low satisfaction, right? But satisfaction in terms of the user, or satisfaction and value in terms of the business, those are kind of like the questions I would have, let's say, just to be much more specific. Maybe you can add a note down below saying not implemented means this, implemented means that, but just adding maybe, or changing a label altogether, just to add clarity to like UX, the UX portfolio, so to speak. And next, you kind of had a plan exactly what you wanted to do, and this is quite specific. But one thing what threw me off, and for everyone else who's on a stream and you're viewing, is this ambition I advocated for us targeting not just UK in our MVP, but also targeting US and Canada, and long term the whole world. This is super ambitious, and I'm going to tell you why. Because there is, I guess, from agile perspective, you have a proof of concept, you would have the MVP, and then you have like a live product which just runs, right, and is maintained. The MVP means very minimal. It's minimal viable product. There's also minimal awesome product map. There's different ways to skin this a little bad boy, but ultimately it has to be minimal. To me, it seems like if you're looking at the London or UK market, I would start regional. It's like every startup, in Silicon Valley or anywhere else using the agile methodologies, they would start like immediately, locally, the community level, then scale it after that MVP is proven and updated into regional level, then scale it into national level, then scale it into global level. But those scales would have to be much more realistic, I think. And this is what I think here is very, very ambitious. And maybe it's not so much about UX, but it's a lot about UX and product strategy. So if you want to appear much more senior, you need to consider very realistically exactly what's reasonable to scale. If you take an example again of Uber or Deliveroo here in UK, or I don't know, one of the other startups who provide like services or tools or products, we definitely started, from nothing basically and targeted a few users and then slowly scaled. But that MVP is that first stab at it. It's a first few users, you're gonna roll it out and get some insights and then roll it forward. And then next, let's see what you have. So features to focus on. Again, how did you arrive to the features is a question. I guess you transferred the Kano model, different bits, exactly what you wanted to focus on. Again, this green, yellow, red is a questionable. I guess this is what you outline you wanted to focus on, but I would question why would you want to focus on those red lines. Maybe you can leave, if you are on a stream, a few comments as well, just to clarify basically, because as a hiring manager, again, you can't expect me to have like minutes. It just would be kind of like a fly through and just seeing does make sense, doesn't make sense, why it is like it is, and trying just to kind of crunch that information and see if you have potential to do the job ultimately. So just make it as clear as possible. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't almost allow people to read into it. Just guide them. Just so it naturally flows. And it's copy, it's assets, it's deliverables. You can support it with, imagery. And then ideation, I guess you have calculating the commute time, commuting at certain times, and giving more information about the areas, which is quite interesting. Many people still needed to commute to the city. This feature needed to be nailed down. So you basically, for each of those buckets, defined exactly the needs of the people. But you see, these needs shouldn't really be the ideas. They should be guided by your research principles. I think this bucketing is almost a bit too late, because those needs you could already, like in the definition, kind of figure out that you would need this. This is like let's say a clear need from your user, and this is what you could be doing later on, ideating on it. So you might need to maybe link it up back to the research, or make it much more clear how it flows basically from one stage to the next one. And lastly, you have quick mockups. So you're basically asking users to sign up or log in. And I would question from the get-go, so meaning if a user just logs in and you ask them to do that, so it's VAP side, so to speak, where users must have an account. And of course, it comes with a question mark. I'm not kind of stating, I'm asking. And then you're basically seeing this example. You want to recreate what the previous tool had, but maybe a bit more streamlined, and then representing exactly different types of different planning options again. So you can specify the location, then the time, the means of transportation for commuting, time of the day, looking for things of that nature, and then the final thoughts, some higher fidelity mockups included as well, which is great. So you can kind of get like a good feel for it, and then final thoughts, which is basically that he would or she, they would be wanted to do more moderated or unmoderated usability tests to actually test those ideas, and I agree. I also feel like the actual permeation of these, these features, I guess, are ideated quite high level. You could be also a bit more specific. Again, with everything, you might end up with, 100 features which would answer these specific things. Like calculated the commute time could be answered to so many different ways. Your product could be different, like it could literally be 100 different products basically in the end if you would address them all. It would be good to understand, if you understand how you prioritize those features to shape this new product and come up with those mockups basically, which represent those features. And of course, this is something maybe your potential hiring manager would ask you in the interview. So, it doesn't mean you have to just botch everything. You need to still understand exactly what's appropriate to better illustrate the actual state of this. But overall, it's really good. I feel like this is, for 1 month's worth of thing. It's really kind of like, you know, it's substantial case. One thing what I would definitely recommend you as your final thought state is to go test it out, capture more evidence, more data that this is actually desirable, this is actually going to be like used, let's say, and of course deepen that flow of how the information, your evidence, that, you know, the insights you capture flows throughout it, and just tighten a little bit on the ideation side. But yeah, this is one of those things. What does everyone else think? Do you have any thoughts in the chat? I see a few questions about UI and UX design, and someone answered already, so I might not pick it up. If you want a specific answer for the same topic, just hit it again. I might try to address it. And someone, Jules loves the Kano model. It's great. And how would you approach this from a service design standpoint? With a service design, maybe I need to make a video actually on the channel and bring it forward, but it's quite there is different ways to skin this basically, but ultimately you would need to zoom out a little bit. You know, even if someone would come to you with a product and let's say you want to address this as a service, it would mean to, you know, to take in all the different touch points, not just the digital touch points. Let's say in this case, it's obvious that, and I'm going to use this as an example, by the way, it's not saying that this case study or this project take is bad. It just means that it's approached as a, you know, like very quick UX project. It's not approached as like a holistic service experience, right? But you would zoom out, you would make sure that, you know, all the different touch points are addressed. It's not just the digital touch points. It's everything that user could actually be interactive with, and or everything they could actually read. Maybe it's a read-only information. It's not just interactive, but it would basically be just yet another layer to that onion. If you would imagine that, let's say if UI is your starter layer, you have UX, you have service design, it basically would be that, and it just detaching a little bit from the detail until you have to go into a specific detail to define those different touch points. But ultimately, you know, a service is basically a whole of different touch points of a product, of the different peripheral touch points. The font size is inconsistent. That's very picky, but yeah, I agree. You know, for the OCD designers, it definitely might stand out. It's something, again, you know, you might want to invest time on a visual design, let's say perspective, on the typography, on the actual graphics, but it's, you know, it's also UX. UX is less about the visual design, as we know. Cool. If nobody has any other questions or suggestions on this, let me just take a sip and let's dive in the next case study. All right, next one is gonna be another challenge and another take on it. This is from David. And David also went this route where he defined an app basically. So he basically produced a PowerPoint deck, and he described exactly what he did. Interestingly, I think it's almost like the same themes are going to apply to a lot of people, and that's great. It means that something what everyone almost can, you know, enhance going forward. We can just take that feedback note I gave and just kind of like address it. But this basically jumps and has a slightly different take because it introduces the product itself, so that it's a fictional company providing affordable housing to young people and others seeking to live in desirable urban areas by converting the extra space of apartments like their living rooms, yada yada. So it's a very different take. And this is where I would be like, you know, like as a, let's say as a product owner of it, or even a UX designer of a previous product, I would be like, ooh, this is a pivot. I wonder what the research is like. And this is exactly what I would be looking, based on the, the actual request for the challenge, I would be digging into. Again, this is a bit of a mouthful as well. I would simplify it. If you're not sure about the actual copy, make sure that you give it to someone to read, someone else who, who might have a little bit less skin in the game about this project you're working on, but someone who can correct or maybe simplify it. If it takes longer than, let's say, a minute to read this at a natural state, you're going to lose your person. And I'm giving this minute as a random, number. It's probably even less than that. But ultimately, your sentences should be definitely smaller, just from UX copy perspective. Make it snappy. Just be succinct. Don't basically write more than you need to ultimately, or break it down into paragraphs, into more statements. Oh, and there's more people joining. Hey, Michelle. Hey, Hannah. Hey, everyone. If you're a bit late, that's totally fine. It's just a second case, so make sure to, jump back and watch the recording after this goes live, and, after the replay goes live, basically after we're done here. But this seems like a quite big pivot, because it allows people to add, different locations. If I understand correctly, this is for you and me who wants to basically convert their extra space of the apartments, like almost like an Airbnb type of thing. But let's see exactly how this goes. And a project duration is 4 weeks, September, October. I don't think it matters really, when you did it. The actual duration matters more, because I can then picture, okay, technically you could achieve this, or technically you could achieve that. As a hiring manager, it gives me a bit of a guidance, of a reference point, but the dates don't really matter that much. One thing which you would definitely could add to add more cred to yourself is responsibilities, is what you did, what was your involvement ultimately. Also, is it conceptual case? You could mention it. You could just add a tiny tag or something like that, which I presume it is. 4 weeks also is very small, unless you are like a consultant who came in to, conceptualize something for a client. And this is another thing. If you remember from my previous case, I said in your problem statements, if you're describing the market state and the context, make sure to add a few bits which back up your claims. You could add a footnote, you could add a stat of sorts. If you say vast number of people are unable to afford living in desirable urban areas where there are higher concentrations of employment, opportunity, and culture, make sure you back it up, because then it's going to add much more weight to your statements as well. It's not just going to be a claim which seems like a conceptual, case basically, where you're just trying to solve problem which might not exist. And that's what I'm thinking always. If there's no like a backing to it, well, it might not exist at all. And the goal here was to facilitate unique features within an application which is easy to use and navigate, while addressing the pain points found in the products of the competitors. Interesting. So this is one way to stab it, which is quite typical hasty bootcamp UX approach, where they say, look at the competitors and then figure out what we're not doing right in terms of UX, and then your UX should be good. Technically, it doesn't really work that way in real life. You still need to engage with the users and understand if that actually, matters. Maybe you're overlooking some competitor. Maybe a competitor, which is an app, probably is not really, a competitor, because people might use something else. There's a lot of ways to skin this, but ultimately it's looking at the depth of the actual experiences. Okay, so and this is my, I guess, oversight, but they added the role and responsibilities, and of course there's user research, analysis, ideation, prototyping, usability testing, but this is all basically UX research and design. You could just state that, and then it would make your UX UI designer role redundant. So you could just keep it at that and put it in the first slide or a second slide where it describes the intro. Okay, let's see what's next. And next is the understanding of the user. So you did user research, personas, problem statements, user journey maps. Interesting, and I hope it's not going to be all deliverables, but let's see. User research, the goals at this stage were to gather a wide range of data pertaining to the experience in finding homes and roommates in urban areas, identifying their pain points while using competitor products and gauging their responsiveness to Cribit's unique housing solution. Research was conducted with 8 test subjects, and I have a note on this. The test subjects, does it mean that you just tested the product with some people? That's one. And another would be, you know, when you test things on people, they're not really test subjects. It's, you know, that kind of test subjects, quote unquote, label is applicable to, like, you know, like lab rats, but not so much people. So I would steer away from that. But this is very picky and very specific. But, you know, just say 8 people, and that's about it. You know, you could just, it would simplify everything and almost cover those 2 issues, I see at least. And they were age 20 or and the group of people age 20 or 30s. And this is, again, a question would be, let's say if I would interview you, why 20, why 30, why does age matter here, you know? Or is it just that you saw that there is a trend of people in between 20 and 30 years old, so that they're, you know, in the need of this? Like, where is this hypothesis or presumption comes from, and how are you trying to target it? You did competitive audits, so 6 competitors. Would be good to see, let's say, you know, the typical approach to competitive analysis is to make a matrix, so it's easy to see exactly what are they doing and to what extent, and to quickly visually compare, so I don't have to read all of this. Like, for example, as a hiring manager, I'll definitely not have enough time to look at everything. And I can see that you looked at Zillow, Apartments.com, Craigslist, Google Maps, Roomy, and Body. Some are direct competitors, some are indirect competitors, which is great that you recognize that. But this is, I think this is US market-based companies. At least Zillow, I think, is US, right? So let's see where it takes us, because it sounds like it's, you know, it's almost like it's in that area as well. You have some actionable insights you got from it, which is matching this specific experience. But you see, this is where I would be a bit careful with that, because this a lot of these statements are based on competitive analysis, right? And capturing actionable insights on a feature basis, that, let's say, Zillow has this awesome feature, so let's do something better, or we are lacking in that extent, let's do something else. From UX perspective, it would be less about the other products. It would be actual people using those products, so you would need to understand how they use. So here, what would benefit you more so than competitive audit, I would almost like say, you know, you can skip this entirely, is to understand what your, like, you know, the audience itself, the potential audience is using right now, and just mapping it out, maybe as is experience map. Whatever it is, it could be just a journey maps, it could be a experience blueprint of source, like for service or product, you name it, it doesn't really matter. But ultimately, you need to show me that you understand how the actual people would use it, because it's not just about competing with other products. And, you know, if it would be about competing with other products, it would have been one of the key problems, but it's not. It's not just about that. User experience is rarely about competition. It's about providing a good user experience, which actually, you know, gels with your users and answer all their needs. And it makes things much more efficient, and the efficacy of it, of their tasks they try to achieve with your, you know, solution is much more optimized. But nevertheless, I think it's good that you did the actual competitive analysis. The pain points, though, you could be specific. Are these the pain points from the actual people you talk to? And I don't think they are, if you're saying when using competitors' products while searching for homes. Okay, they probably are. I might be wrong here. But you could definitely state of how did you arrive at this? Is it clearly that you interviewed them? Maybe you just need to specify that to introduce me as a hiring manager, so I don't write you off immediately, you know? Ultimately, you want to show me that you didn't skip on anything, that you didn't take too many shortcuts. You actually did UX as it should be done. And of course, I'm not going in detail here, so it could be maybe marketing issue of showcasing your skills, or the case study, the presentation maybe. There's a lot of variables. I might be wrong as well, so it's totally fair. Take it with a grain of salt, and everyone else on a chat or who's viewing this stream, just take it with a grain of salt, because there's of course a lot of things we need to consider to be fair. And then persona. This is something I noted down, by the way, in my notes, but and I might be like verbatim just read it out, but persona is London-based, as I can see. London, UK, is relocating to the suburbs of City of London, and this is where the dissonance is going to start, because your one persona, and I want to understand one, if it's just one persona or you just show this as an example. If it's just one of many, tell me that it's one of many. Because if it's one persona, it's like very, very dangerous. It's a shaky ground, like the previous case study, the first one. Another one is the actual location is definitely gonna matter a lot. The basically your look at, let's say, Zillow, apartments.com, Craigslist, Google Maps, Roomy, Body, and things of that nature, those competitors, what you perceive are, versus what the actual person in London would look at, is going to be very different. We don't have, let's say, and this is from my perspective, we don't have Zillow, we don't have Craigslist. The tools would be used very differently, and I can guarantee you, because of that, the experience is going to be also different. There is also the behavior and attitudinal variables to consider, because if you would engage with people from US, let's say, versus people from England, both talk English, right? But there is massive difference in terms of work culture, in terms of work-life balance, in terms of the things people focus on, and everything in between. There's cultural differences, basically. And it's, the one is that products are different, but also that people are definitely going to use them slightly differently. That's why in a previous case study I said, if you're going to start with MVP, make sure that you start with immediate community, then region, then national level, then continental maybe, and then global. You kind of need to branch it, because if each of those scales, and every time you go from one layer to the next one, your product or service is going to have to adapt massively. One of the things, an example of a very tangible thing is, let's say, Uber experience in US is different than in, let's say, Europe. There's in Europe you have GDPR laws, you have a lot of different privacy laws. There's a lot of things which just don't add up from the legislative perspective, but also it doesn't gonna add up from a people's perspective, because we're just not used to the same things, let's say. But anyways, this is just a side note. If you could correct that and go deeper into research and kind of like bring back the facts, based on those differences, it's just gonna be much more substantial. Your evidence is going to be much more stronger, because as a hiring manager, that I would definitely pick up. That would definitely stand out to me. That, let's say, you kind of captured, something about a person who's not really using the actual products you described they would, let's say. So yeah, other bits which are great here is that you used user journey mapping. So again, this one maybe you could have brought up a bit earlier, but I would also make it a bit more visual, a bit more easy to grasp, add a bit more kind of like, different lanes for it. So it's because you have task lists, feelings, and you have improvement opportunities. But what I would look for is pain points. And I think this is really important for anything we do in UX. We need to answer some sort of problems, right? So you need to highlight exactly of what the issues are, because it's great that you empathize with your users and you describe that they're daunted by research and things of that nature, but you could also express them in a very tangible issues people face, which you can address with, let's say, a layer of experience design and UX. Oh, and I see David is on an actual chat. Yes, pain points were obtained doing research interviews. Then the only thing what you would need to do in that case is just state that or make it very clearly, because I think in the beginning what you did is you just described that you did research, personas, problem statements. It's really just like how does that connect, and clarifying the points of where did you get those insights from, and then how does that connect. That's as simple as that. And then user journey map, I see that immediately it's a jump to the start of a design. And if you've seen from the previous case, let me just bring it up. And this is just for an example case. Not saying you have to do that, but I think it's going to benefit you a lot. Is, something like after you did that user journey, let's say, and you mapped it out, you could do something like how might we's, extracting the issues and finding out exactly, like just brainstorming for, using the more old schoolish methods, just ideating on the things you could be doing and prioritizing them, and then taking it into features. From UX standpoint, there's a massive jump here. And it's not just UX designers who are going to need you to describe it, of how did you took what you researched and made it like tangible here. There's also going to be that thing. So you're going to need to justify and explain exactly what you did, but make sure that it connects. Make sure that there is not like a sudden jump where it's going to seem like you just either skipped the step, maybe you didn't, but it could be that something you just need to clarify a bit further, and just connect the dots basically for the people, so we know that you didn't skip. So that definition ideation state is something you could explore further basically, and then add all those feature sets, whatever you would want to do, and illustrate them then with these wireframes to basically showcase the prototyping. And I noticed, which I really liked, by the way, was that you dug deep into these explanations. So almost for each of the key feature sets, David basically described different bits of exactly what benefit the user gets out of it, like what does it do, how does it answer it. I think it's very clear and very interesting representation of that. This is what I liked the most, I guess, about this case study, which I think everybody could just take and learn from a lot, or start, taking this. Don't take it, don't copy it, of course, but just taking that idea of how else could you represent those different things of, the solutions basically for both user needs and issues. And then you made like a low fidelity prototype of connecting different dots, the definition, the usability studies, and the location. Again, this is something I picked up and I have it in my notes, but you stated that you tested with people, with 5 participants in that target group, but you tested it in Boston. So that persona, again, which you designed it for, it just doesn't add up. I would maybe correct course a little bit so that you don't trip yourself too much. Because in a hiring manager's, again, perspective, if the details don't match up, they're going to be very wary, or we might grill you in the actual interview process to understand exactly why you did what you did, ultimately. I like that you described the usability study and how much time it took. There is almost like a summary slide, what you learned from it. They're very specific to the actual features, and if you followed a few of my reviews, just taking that holistic side of things, taking more holistic side of the things, I think, it's testing the usability of the features is important, but also you would need to test the desirability, because it's a new product which you add to the market. You would also want to outline exactly, based on all those different value add to the user, that we can see it at a glance, let's say. What does that really mean? You could expand a little bit. Like, you could tell such a good story if you just, besides, of course, outlining the usability of the features, also outline how does that gonna integrate into user lives. What that would look like, if you have any evidence of that. If let's say that people are generally very excited about it, the majority of those people you tested with stated that this would be replaceable and this could do X, Y, Z for their lives, let's say, you could capture that as well. Maybe capture some anecdotal evidence, like some quotes, things of that nature, to better even illustrate exactly what it was. I mean, other than, you know, actual usability and you capturing the KPIs, the main tasks, you know, they needed to complete, and outlining that, and like the changes you made, which is really good as well. You could also just dig a bit deeper into that holistic service side, I guess. Like, how does that experience really integrate in the user lives, and, you know, what difference does it make? What you learned, what the impact was, what the testing is. And this is where you say the client was satisfied with the result, one we've achieved, because I would question, is this the actual case? Is it a conceptual case? Is this a case you made for this challenge? In that case, you know, you might want to be very selective with the words as well, which you use. So, you know, it clearly reflects to the hiring manager that this is the type of project you did and this is the outcome, you know, so they don't kind of like mistake themselves. The worst you could do is, let's say, to be invited in the interview and then they realize that, oh, this is actually concept, but we thought that it's an actual client thing. So just to be a bit kind of like, you know, wary of that, and being quite selective of what you state. And the next steps, you have additional features you want to add to it, mock-ups and chat forums to be designed. So again, additional features, some integral features. What's next you could add to this as well is, again, that holistic experience bit. You know, like, how would you onboard the users? How would they find out about this app? Something you could probably correct a little bit the course with the following research and just going back to, let's say, your persona, let's say, and just aligning that, trying to understand what else are they doing. Like, how do they discover those different tools if you haven't captured that? Because that could be potentially the route you could inform, you know, your actual UX strategy of adoption and how your product is being found in the market. You know, just something to think about. But generally, it's really nicely represented case study. And I like that you introduce exactly. I like a lot about your actual features, and just, you know, with every kind of like a usability test or any testing, if you have side by side before and after, people get it immediately. So that's another really good thing. Let me just take a sip and see if there's any notes in the actual chat. I see Gustavo from Brazil. Welcome. Cool. All right, let's proceed with the next one. And if you have any thoughts of your own, if you disagree with me, also just post it in the chat. Let's have a good conversation. Maybe you can also give David some tips, or you can give some Discord member, get him mama tips as well for them, so they can actually apply. You know, just be sure to keep it constructive, but, you know, engage. Add a few different notes of your thoughts. Cool. Right, let's do next one. And the next one is by Adam. And Adam was quite honest with his take. And he basically said, hey, I had limited amount of time, but I want like a bit of feedback. This is how I approached it. He basically did background research. I like how he laid out all the different themes, and I think this is almost like a key takeaway from his take on this challenge. So I think we can kind of like break it down and really quickly run through it. But he also listed out some of the next steps which he wanted some feedback on, and this is exactly what I'm, you know, gonna be focusing on. But right off the bat, for his research synthesis, what he did, and you know, this is a lot of ways to skin a cat. Of course, nothing beats the actual user research of the actual users, but as a start, as a, let's say, project onboarding, as a something you just getting like a, you know, a background research or secondary research, you can use a lot of different sources. And I like that, you know, what he did and is go on Reddit, basically. You know, he basically went through all those different sources I described in the challenge to check out, like Housing UK, let's say. People pour their hearts out, you know, and their minds out. They're basically stating what works, what doesn't work, their frustrations. And what Adam did here is he basically, let me just zoom in quickly, he basically outlined exactly almost like what's important, what the issues are. I would hear probably just from structural standpoint, if Adam would be my teammate, make very clear what's a pain point, what's an opportunity, and what's a general insight. It's almost like if you kind of see a different way to represent the, like, let's say, experience map with different pain points, tasks, pain points, opportunities, whatever lanes you would choose, right? It's really just doing that, is just representing it so it's easier to then extract those different bits, which he did, by the way. So just to be fair, he did some synthesis as well. But for someone who, let's say, would work alongside, it would just be much, much easier. And as you can see, he captured quite a few different discussions here, and he captured a few different insights. So it's one way to prime your further research, basically. One thing, which let me just really quickly, I just noticed I missed out before, but ideally I would have continued with primary research after that, mainly user interviews. That's good. That's very honest take, that this is just an intro. This is just a base. This is just something he could build on and inform his further hypotheses that, hey, perhaps this is what could work because of X, Y, Z, and then, run interviews or do surveys or do some other different methods which we tend to use in UX, which are appropriate to capture behaviors and, attitudes on a quant or qual axis. And I see there's quite a few different discussions. I'm curious about your comment on competitive analysis and about how it's not about competing with other products, but about data research prior from user needs. Would not seeing the competitive analysis be part of taking business needs into consideration? If there's lack of differentiation, you'd be bound to fail. No. Yes, of course. Like, you never design things in a vacuum. And I'm going to digress from Adam's case, but it's important to address, I think. But you never design any service or product in a vacuum. You always design it so it succeeds, right? And if one of the things in a product success is to, if it's not a brand new thing which nobody else thought of, and there's nothing like that in the market, then you definitely need to consider the competition. But it has to be appropriately shown that it's it's almost like appropriate step of a project, right? But also appropriately actioned. Ultimately, competitive analysis could inform your marketing, it could inform your launches, it could inform your features, it could inform so many different things. But even the competition itself, the business could tell you that you're competing with 5 different products, but you might talk to the actual users or customers, and they tell you that there's that direct competition of 5 products, but there's also another 5 which nobody considered with. That's why you would do the user research. So competitive analysis is great, almost like a baseline to understand exactly where you stand in the market, right, and what you could do about it. There's definitely a tangible, really good tool to do, but it has to be appropriately laced with the appropriate research methods to then take it into the features, let's say. So you don't kind of just go with the immediate, anyone can do competitive analysis. It doesn't have to be just UX run. Like usually businesses, business analysts, product managers, owners do their competitive analysis anyways. So what you as a UX designer can do is overlay that with the actual user usage, the actual journeys, the actual products they use, and the actual pain points, the actual needs, and then, create a richer picture basically. And that's what I think in that case to me is was a bit missing, or it wasn't clear enough just looking at it. Because, considering that the hiring managers are just going to glance over and see for things which make sense or doesn't make sense, that's just something to consider. Cool. There's so many questions. Wow. I think we uncorked something. I know it's better to do a high fidelity prototype to test and explain to stakeholders, but can we make, I guess, a perfect work just put low fidelity prototypes and sketches? The fidelity is relative. It's again, you like with everything, ideally you would work backwards. So what's your goal? If you want to convince a stakeholder that this feature should be this way, you then need to consider what would be most appropriate. Like it almost is, is highly subjective and also very individual, because some stakeholders love the interactions and they love the visual layer. So you might want to invest time to make it much more like, much more detailed basically, and prototype high fidelity stuff. Some won't. And you could just go by with just like paper sketches or whiteboard exercises, and they're going to get immediately. So again, it depends who you play with and what you want to achieve. Ultimately, it's going to come down to that. And having said that, if you're going to prototype something for your user research and testing, then consider what the users would need. Because if your users need to type in some data, and you want to test if that specific feature would stick with them, and they could use this new method to do that, then you need to make it as seamless as possible that the users wouldn't tell a difference, that it's fake, or they would feel like you could actually observe the natural use of it. And in that case, your prototype should be much more higher fidelity. Of course, you could do participatory design, yet another research method where you invite the users and you design it together and you sketch out low fidelity stuff, you get their input, you almost test it at the same time. But it's just a prerequisite for then doing it in a high fidelity and then testing again, because you cannot test the usability of things on a whiteboard, let's say, or on a sketch, even if you make it interactive. And, I've seen a lot of prototypes of a paper stuff where people do it like I might post it somewhere on the socials. One of my teammates back in the day did that. But that was good to onboard it immediately and get the sense of it. But once it comes to actual implementation, you would definitely want to test it in a higher fidelity. I hope that answers the question. It's long-winded, I know. Cool. Let's move on to our next one. If everyone's fine with that, just to give Adam a few notes before I waffle too much. But Adam, of course, is honest, right? So he knows that he cannot do interviews. That's totally fair. This is something he would do later. And he ran a synthesis, basically, where he created some sort of cohorts. And I'm just going to dive right into it. Again, I might miss a lot of critical detail, but that's just how we might need to do. But he basically grouped them into workplaces, nostalgia, commute, upsides of London. And I guess these represent, from actual, what I see, is what people care about, or what their like a mental model is of the key drivers, key factors they would consider, basically. And what the blue thing is users have flexible jobs. They don't need to commute to London every day. Let me just see exactly what does Adam mean with that. So after gathering insights from conversations I've arranged them according to topics, then distilled them. I have found that. Okay, so the blue things are the distilled bits, the takeaways. There could be a different ways to represent these, I guess, a bit more clear. You could just make it like, like if these are the issues or something, you could make this green or something just to color code it a bit. And then how did you take those different bits, and how did you, I guess, decide that those specific bits summarizes that? Like how did you prioritize these bits? That's my question would be here. And without going too deep, without, boring everyone on a stream, he summarized. This is where I would be like, there's ways to actually represent this research in a little bit more structured way. I might need to maybe make some videos of how to do so. I know that some templates are quite useful for people to kind of take all that endless list of bullet points and just kind of put in different buckets and say this is the outcomes, just to crunch up the insights a little bit and to help synthesize ultimately, to make it much more actionable. Ultimately, there's a lot of ways to do that, but I'm taking this as a working state, right? So this is what let's say I would imagine Adam is my teammate, and let's say he's working on this project. I would just come in and just see exactly what he's doing. So that's totally fine. I would just need to spend time doing this. I'm not taking this as a case study. What he did, though, based on those insights, he went into proto-personas. And proto-personas, one of one of the viewers actually asked something about personas, and I already forgot what I answered. But it was about ambiguity and starting with personas. Where do you start? What information you use? You should probably start with proto-personas as a starting point, and then you can build up the depth and different aspects to it going kind of forward. If you need to deliver it, if you don't need to deliver it, you could just stick with the proto-personas and call it a day. It would be fair enough. But what he did is basically he segmented into 2 proto-personas. You know me by now. I would be asking, why just 2? Why those 2? What's different between them? Maybe Harry and Jane are different in their behaviors. Just put a stamp on it. Put a label saying Harry is, I don't know, a risk taker, right? And this is out of context, of course. Jane maybe is a bit more security driven, something along those lines. If that's what they care about, let's say, and their attitudes and behaviors are representing that. But other than that, I think, without diving deep into this, I would just question which of these things do you actually use and how do you use. Maybe something you would kind of like reframe into the case study or going into the case study, basically. But segmentation, and one of the notes I had for myself to bring into the stream was, how did you segment it? Like, what sort of hypotheses you had in your mind, basically. Because you don't just arrive at these. I mean, it could summarize sort of, but your thinking behind it is what's kind of like missing to me, I guess. Maybe you have it in your head. Maybe something you could consider when you, again, represent it in a case study. Hi there. Is it wrong or right to start with empathy mapping first, then persona? It doesn't, well, ideally, yes. I mean, empathy mapping, if you put it at a very, very basic level, you map empathy to help business stakeholders or yourself or your teammates empathize with the users. It's really as simple as that. People usually overthink and make it like we need to do empathy mapping. We need to do personas. That's BS. You don't need to do anything. It's like, if you lack empathy with your users, use empathy map. If you don't know who your users are, or your stakeholders don't know who your users are, or it's very hard to agree who you focus on, make a persona. It's as simple as that. In each project, I wouldn't almost do cookie cutter approach where you always do empathy maps, always do personas. Maybe in certain projects it's going to make more sense to do jobs to be done. Maybe in others it's just a proto-personas. Maybe in others it's empathy maps. It's really up to you how you do that. But, personally, from my experience, empathy maps, where it aided me most, was to actually onboard business stakeholders and the core team that this is what users actually think, feel, and say. And then kind of just bringing common understanding and saying, we can now take this information, and this is what users actually are, and we empathize with them, and we can make it actionable, maybe make a persona, maybe describe otherwise of what we're targeting, and knowing exactly what matters to the users on a deep level. So it's not just by proxy or just guessing, and as simple as that. It's just a tool. Think of it as just a tool, as a vessel to give a message and allow you to communicate with someone and agree and align on what to do next. It's as simple as that. You don't need to do anything. Read 2021. Yeah. No, but it's just that. It's basically, there has to be a reason for you to do things, because, again, I'm not gonna rant too much, but UX is costly. It costs too much. I mean, like, no business wants to invest in UX because of all these things we do, because we tend to either do too little or too much. We need to find a really common ground which, answer all those different challenges. Like, if you would go out and you would do all the different, how many UX research methods do we have for all the behaviors, attitudes, quant and qual, dimensions? If you take Nielsen Norman's groups, let's say, division of the different methods, there are 20. you could apply all those different 20 research methods in any given project, but that would be definitely an overkill, because you can capture behaviors and attitudes you need with one method or two methods or three methods. You don't need to have 20 methods. It's just picking the right tool for the right issue. It's, you know, it's just as simple as that. And of course, when you start your career and you're a junior, and the only tool, again, you know, this is that cliche thing, but if if only tool you have is a hammer, right? So every problem is going to look like a nail and you're going to hammer it. But as you develop, you're going to discover so many other tools where you're going to be able to gauge, hey, maybe I shouldn't use a hammer. Maybe I can use a staple gun instead, because, you know, I don't need to like break the walls. I can actually just, you know, just do it, and it's quicker and it's more efficient and it's less costly, and business understands it, and, you know, all the different other factors. As simple as that. Cool. It sounds, as long as the boss is happy, everyone will have easy day at work. Yeah, there's a little bit of that, sure. I mean, it's, you know, it's stakeholder management too. You know, you shouldn't make enemies out of bosses either. You need to bring them on the journey into UX. That's almost like the hardest skill to learn, is how to make people care about proper UX. Cool. I see that there is a chapter on the rates. That's cool. Let me continue with the Adam stuff. So he made the proto-personas, and I'm not going to stick to that too much. Competitive analysis. So he did some competitive analysis, and this is where it kind of makes sense for him just to do competitive analysis, right? Because he didn't do any interviews, he didn't do any deep user research, so he didn't, you know, he didn't go into depth of, let's say, experience mapping, or, you know, empathy mapping, or any of those different tools or methods or tactics, activities to be done. So he basically jumped from what he had his like fingers on, like very minimal approach, right? And he knows it. He basically summarized of the key tools, and these are UK based. So Zoopla, Rightmove, On the Market, Prime Location, all of them are based, and I think most of them have that surge-based thing, because we use the same transport APIs. So they can basically estimate your commute times and the distances and things of that nature, right? So he basically said that these are most popular sites, and they're three most popular, yada, 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 yada. When it takes us into the different use case which he described in Rightmove and Zoopla, and I know for sure that Rightmove and Zoopla have those type of features. So at least he went and researched about that. He also tried to look at very specific cases. So Oxford, 2 bedrooms, any price, any type, and see exactly the results across the different bits. I would question again about the results itself, if that matters too much. Because presumably, and let me just go back a little bit, unless his research states differently, I would say that the time of a commute would be one of the key factors, but so he basically took different states and tried to look at different. This is where I would question. Maybe I'm very wrong here again. Maybe I'm not reading into it too much or trying to comprehend, but the results of it, of how many properties you would have around that area, maybe it matters to people, but I guess it's, you know, it's still about the commutes itself. I guess maybe just like clearly separating and bucketing those use cases, or those things, Adam, you discover in these bits. I would almost like take those and use those. Let's say if this is one of the themes that they want to be close to his friends in the city, or there is some sort of other pain points, he doesn't know which areas would be great for their new homes, to take that as a theme and then build some sort of, you know, answers to them. Just basically build up on top of it. Let me see exactly if I zoom out. He actually summed up the features itself, the company info, screenshots, strengths and weaknesses. So this type of thing, what I was suggesting in a previous case study, is would be good to just add a matrix, right? So where you can actually clearly visually see that, you know, this product offers this, that product offers that. And I totally understand that this is kind of like that brain dump. It's in process type of approach. And let's see what's next. He basically tried to use again the Kano or Kano model to prioritize the different bits. Again, I would question how many of those features and how do they transfer from that step to the next step. But he basically, I guess, ideated on the different bits. He then tried to prioritize exactly. The issue with the previous case and what I highlighted was the complexity. Is it feasibility based? Is it a cost? Is it complexity of implementation? Is it the technical side, which you're trying to assess? And the value. So for whom? Is it users? Is it business value? Is it combined value? And you kind of have a formula in your head of, you know, would add a lot of sense for, you know, make a lot of sense for the actual users, but also the business. It just would be good to specify exactly. And this is very technical point without reading too much into it. But what he got out of that, he basically prioritized the features by their technical feasibility, importance, quickly revealed how minimal value product would look like, and kind of outlining that. And the next steps, which is basically create storyboards, better illustrate how process of a property buying and all that jazz, which is exactly what I expect. But I would challenge Adam, and I think a lot of you might agree in the chat, because what he did, basically in the beginning, he said that he's going to do secondary research, and then he didn't have, you know, ability to do primary research because of time and also, you know, investment in kind of reaching to people, right, and finding the insights. But I would almost say stop here. Stop at that synthesis you created, or stop at those personas or competitive analysis, but don't go further into like opportunities and defining the MVP until you know enough. And since you're stating that you don't know enough, you didn't do any user interviews, you don't have enough qualitative or maybe quantitative insights, I would almost like, you know, your next steps really should be at this point somewhere. Because even your proto-personas might be informed by that background research, which is fair enough. But I'm bloody sure that if you would engage with those people who represent those personas and try to interview them, you would get a ton more feedback. And then that next step, even maybe competitive analysis, again overlaying it of how they use those products in their day-to-days, would be also quite different. And then everything else. So it's almost like, you know, not to invest into the next steps about storyboarding, go back a little bit, pause a sec, and figure out what's missing. And I think you're spot on in that first statement that you need to do a bit more research, and that's what I would basically do, because it's clear that, you know, as you go, if your research is not solid, it's not deep research, your solutions are gonna become like, it's gonna become less and less, I guess, solid, more watered down. It's just, you know, it's like you run out of steam basically, and you know, it's gonna become very clear once you start to like storyboard that it becomes, you know, it's not as kind of structured, it's not very specific, it doesn't seem like plausible basically, because everything has to be in UX evidence-based, right? Otherwise we're just ideating and creating and conceptualizing ideas, but UX is more than that. So I'm sure you would agree with that. So I would challenge you to just go back and do more research basically, and then resume it. Cool, let me check what's on the chat really quick and take a sip. Okay, there is an argument. Someone got into fisticuffs. So salary, and I guess discussing if salary is important. If you want my 2 cents, I can give my 2 cents. But I feel like it's quite, well, you know, I had actually a similar chat on Discord earlier on, well, actually a few days ago. One of the members reached out asking about taking different jobs and what to consider. And you know, in the beginning of a career, I would advise every junior to focus on learning opportunities more so than the actual money or salary, because as you learn the UX skills and as you collect the evidence, as your portfolio becomes stronger and stronger, you can charge so much more. Like this is incredible. If you would just like, you know, you would, let's say, I'm gonna give a random example, and this is gonna, like, you know, trigger a lot of people, but doesn't matter. If you would take this minimal wage, which barely covers your like daily needs for a couple of years, but it has all the support you need, it has all the learning options you need, it's gonna make you a proper UX designer. You can then 10x your salary after those 2 years. That's ultimately comes down to that you need to first and foremost in the beginning of your career focus on that it's a supportive environment for you to learn quick and develop those new skills. So you have maybe seniors, you have maybe leads in the actual firm who can show you the, you know, the ropes basically. They can show you how to do things. And then the salary, the money is going to follow. The money is almost, I guess, debatably, but it's adequate to the value you deliver. The bigger is your arsenal of skills and the toolkit, the more value you deliver, the more money you can earn. It's, you know, it still comes down to that. And UX is such a lucrative field that I would focus more so on learning. And, you know, in those couple of years, few years, you're going to reach a state where you can become picky of what kind of like areas. And it's also, again, you know, not to, you know, batter a dead horse, but it's also because the market is so bloody competitive. There's so many people are trying to get in. You know, it's like you have a lot of choice in terms of what you pick, but also there is very little choice because a lot of people knowing that we're going to focus first on learning and have it almost like an extended couple of years of learning, you know, after they learned UX. Imagine almost an ad hoc, like a good example would be, and this is definitely not the same thing, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but like medical studies, right? You don't become a doctor by going and studying for a few years. Even if you stop there after your studies, you're not going to be a medical professional because you also need to do residency. And that's what I'm trying to, you know, kind of like almost like have as an analogy that UX also requires residency. And I think the first couple of years of UX should be residency, where you learn a lot and then you can earn top buck once you have solid enough skills, if that makes sense. And of course, a lot of people are not going to agree. Totally fine. And I know that the markets are different, the rates are different. You know, some people want UI instead of UX. All of that needs to be considered. But in general, at the first things what should matter most is learning and acquiring those skills. And then the money is going to follow. And then you can earn a lot. I mean, UX is lucrative, right? It's not a secret. That's why a lot of people flock into it, because it's an awesome job. It's very challenging, but you can earn. You can actually make a living out of it and maybe go consultancy or contractor route and even charge even more, almost like a sole person or sole business representative. Cool. All right, let me jump into the last one. I think also, another question. Do you offer one-on-one portfolio reviews through Super Peer Web for UX mentors? It's paid, of course. No, I don't. And that's exactly why I started the YouTube channel. So I can scale the advice, because at this point I have very little time. You could almost ask any person who knows me. They know that I like have no free time whatsoever. So I don't commit to anything, sadly, because it just drains. And it's also, you know, once you get into the drill, and this is from my perspective, if you can empathize, is that you kind of start to give the same feedback over and over again. I already feel that in the videos as well. When I review portfolios, you probably recognize that the feedback kind of like starts to pile up. It's the same notes. And it's the same if I would give you a review. It doesn't mean that the video is less personal. You should, you know, of course, be like in charge of your learning. So you still need to chase. And I know that one-to-one advice, nothing beats it, right? Mentorship advice. But on the same note, you can email me, you can ask for advice. It's going to take a bloody long time for me to get back to you. but I just don't have a capacity to do that. It almost doesn't matter what you pay me. It's not about payment either. It's just I don't have enough time, and I try to optimize my, like what I give back to the community, because it's what's most efficient, and it's usually creating a video which anyone can watch, and it's gonna stay there for years to come, and anyone can view it and get most out of it, because yeah, it just those things ultimately. Cool. And I agree with Michelle as well. I just noticed that she doesn't agree mentorship for pay. This is, you get coaching. It's not mentorship. Mentors are not paid. Mentors are like your friends. And on that note, my upcoming book, and this is a quick plug, but the Get Into UX book is coming out on 1st of November, just after Halloween. I'm going to leave a link down below so you can pre-order, but it covers a lot of these different bits. It covers a lot of these portfolio issues and mentorship issues and everything in between. It's career advice book, so you can pick it up. You can already pre-order it, and just use it basically. It's meant to do exactly that. Instead of me trying to do one-to-one sessions and do a lot of those and kind of repeat the same messaging, I just wrote this guidebook, tiny book, well, 200 pages or so. You go figure. But you can just pick it up, and you can get enough of insights to kind of and take charge and take control of it. I'm sure it's going to help you out. Cool. All right, let me take a sip and let's dive into the last case study. Cool. All right, the next one, and this was as well. This is the interesting one, and let me just check my notes so I don't just wing it, just to make it as structured as possible. But this is from Marcus, and Marcus basically submitted this, like he spent a lot of time on this, just like other people as well. I mean, it shows in every single case study so far submitted. But Marcus made basically a brand, the commute from, and he made, this almost like a case study walking through key benefits and what he did and what he's saying, and which kind of like just made me kind of just be like very, very aware of this and kind of like just perk up, was this, what is the commute from, and describing exactly the advantages of it, which is shortest commute time, lowest housing price to rent, best schools nearby, and things which I never considered before, but I actually consider a lot living in London, is lowest crime rate. It's just something you don't really talk about. You just kind of like, you look for things which are like, oh, this neighborhood might be a bit, dodgy, or it might be a bit like there's more crime to it, reportedly so, or, there's someone says that, someone said that, and you kind of guide yourself and you steer away from it, but you never kind of put it as a fact. You never kind of consider it as one of the variables which are, like, well covered, let's say. So that was very interesting to me. And I'm, immediately as a hiring manager, I would be like, I want to see the evidence. I want to see what he researched. I want to see what the themes were like. And so he summarized itself, that commute from, that all that jazz, all that, like what I requested in the UX challenge, what it was like, what there is potential, what the user problem is. And I would probably, when you introduce the user problem, also state where it comes from, that maybe this is a discovered user problem. So it's clear to me that it's not just something you immediately thought of or presumed, but it's actually something you discovered later, and you're going to show me the evidence. And then the solution itself, which is basically just describing, very briefly exactly what he delivered. So main deliverables he went through, and he basically prototyped. It's quite high fidelity, and describing the features itself, very quick glimpse exactly of what the tool would be like. But you can immediately see, I don't tend to go deep into UI designs, because to me it's almost more important what informed it. But you can just at a glance see exactly what it's about, right? Like what it allows the users to do, and if not, you can just read those taglines and see that, hey, it's easy navigation to priorities of the area, things of that nature. The only thing though, I would just look if you implement anything about the crime, and I can see that crime rate, areas with low rate of reported crimes, something to consider. There is a lot of APIs, I guess, available, but immediately I would think kind of like, is it realistic from service design standpoint that you have that API or that data to actually capture this? Or is it going to be anecdotal, where the users of this tool can submit that, hey, this neighborhood has, it's not that great. It could be that too. So it's something to consider and something that I would be looking for, and maybe even asking you in the interview saying, hey, how would you like realize that crime rate? How would you make it happen? What would you think? And it could be that you haven't considered, fair, but just so you can actually articulate of what were you thinking about it. Let's see exactly. So the process, right? So the responsibilities: hands-on researcher, designer, and user testing person. This sounds a bit odd to me, and English is not my first language either, but user testing person, you could just say researcher and designer. That kind of like it becomes redundant. Methodology: design thinking driven conceptual website development. Design thinking is fair, basically, and it kind of is going to show. And again, design thinking, UX, design thinking can make UX, but UX process is, it's UX. It's like the two could kind of overlap, but they're quite different as well. Something else that we very often hiring managers are going to know about it, right? So because it's their bread and butter. It's just so you know about it as well. And the project plan, which is 3 weeks of user research, definition, ideation, following by 2 weeks. Just say like 5 weeks and leave it at that. It's what follows is going to be much more important, which is basically the discovery. And having looked at this before, by the way, because I captured already that it's a design thinking project, it was very clear that this is almost like an approach which people would do, let's say, in consultancies, where they roll in for a like selected time period. We kind of like engage with stakeholders, capture the evidence as much as possible, and they try to kind of quickly ideate and prototype and user test things. So it's very, very kind of snappy. That's why it might trigger some of the hardcore UXers. To me, it's like I get both points, right? So I can assess it still, and I can see if there's potential. But the hardcore UXers, which you know of, they might be like, oh, it's design thinking, right? So there's a bit of that as well to be quite careful. I like the representation, right? So he describes it, he tells a story, he tells exactly what the issues are, right? But it's almost like, this is where the missing bit would be like, how did they extract it? Who did they talk to? As you can see, the interview results, right? So it's 6 interviews were conducted with users who recently, less than 6 months, moved or planned to move to London, right? So that's an interesting take, I guess. And I guess I like visually that it summarized that, right? It's really easy to grasp, but it's also like, I would like to see a bit more, I guess, of those pain points, because if these are just the key high-level points, are there more, basically? Are there any decision-making factors? Is there any more insights you could actually provide besides just, like quickly outlining it? And the personas: summarize research results. So basically outlining the personas. I like that there is no bull personas, but I also would question if the goal and frustration is enough, because frustration points are, I guess, the pain points and their goals, but it's just 2 per each, and it's also 2 different personas, right? One interesting bit, by the way, if you noticed, is that it's about people who moved or plan to move to London, right? And if I noted it down correctly, let me just see exactly. From a foreign country. So people who moved from a foreign country to find it difficult to obtain. So it's basically foreigners. It's immigrants like myself, let's say, moving into London, right, 6 months ago. That's what he decided to target. I would ask why, or what was the idea behind it. And, it could be answered in the interview again. Maybe it's not something to capture in the portfolio, but maybe you could. But it's really the rationale behind it. And also if, let's say, Dave, who came from Brazil and Emily, who came from Germany, if that actually reflects, their actual like day-to-days. How did you like, I guess, assembled those personas? Like, what else did you consider? Was it very clear that like all those different, was it six people you interviewed, like very clearly split between Dave and Emily? Like, was it free and free, like that type of thing? How do they differ? And I can see that you outline this quote: information from internet cannot reflect real situations. So it's a skeptical Dave, right? And finding a home is more than commute time from work, which is Emily, which is basically she's just a considerate Emily, right? But is there anyone else, or is it just that? Like, I would want to know that. And also, who didn't you consider as well? Might be worth, like in one of the cases where it was anti-persona, maybe you could actually take that pattern and just also add it. And then the problem statement. So you have two problems for both of the users. Dave is a software engineer. He needs to know the real situations of property he wants to buy and areas nearby. And Emily is a writer who needs to rent a flat close to workplace and her friends. Okay. So this is also a pivot a little bit from the original commute from, which is totally fine. But I would also question, like, this is, to me, maybe I'm not reading into the detail too much, but I would wonder if this commuting is basically London-based commuting app then, right? And it's fair. This is like, it's your project. I would just wonder if you could explain why did you decided to pivot. It's totally fine, but maybe this is exactly maybe where you could apply that competitive analysis, because it seems like in your head you found this gap in the market where the foreigners come in and they're struggling to to find these places to live for commute within London area, right? And you're targeting just foreigners. Give me a bit of substance of how did you decide that? Was it that you did competitive analysis? Is it a steer from business? Is it something like, where did that hypothesis came from, basically? That's what I would want as an introduction, and maybe I missed it, but it could just become much more clear for everyone, basically. You jumped into ideation and how might we's. So I guess it's good that you take that one thing and you carry on to the next one, and you basically take the issue, you how might we it, so it's fair, but you also come up with just one thing. Like, this is where, how might we is such a powerful activity, because you can come up with so many questions and you can come up with so many ideas, and you decided to focus on just one idea per question. I would be like, nah, let's come up with at least 10, 20, like, don't limit yourself. Rather come up with a lot of different ideas and think about the future, about ideal states, and then just start to narrow it, start to diverge, and start to converge, and start to kind of laser focus on which of those things you could prioritize or focus. And you could use something what you've been used by other people in other examples. Again, I'm using it for example, but take a Kano model or something like that, Kano, and just prioritize those bits by, let's say, I usually prioritize by feasibility, how hard it is to implement, and by value, but being specific that it's perceived user value and, let's say, a cost-related business value. If you can overlap the two and combine it into one bucket, that this is a value metric of sorts or perceivable value, then you can actually prioritize that. So don't limit yourself. Go spread out, basically, before you converge into singular ideas. And I see that you did some crazy eights. I guess this is what you follow up with. So you're trying to outline exactly of what the Dave's interaction would look like. And this is precisely why this is a design thinking approach, because the crazy eights is such a typical activity to use in design thinking. But it doesn't mean you couldn't use it in anywhere else. It doesn't mean that it cannot be part of your ideation toolkit, ideation workshop toolkit. It works pretty damn well because it gets people, scribbling. They might just write down, they might picture things. So it's great that you used it. I would presume you used it alone because it's your personal project, but in real scenarios you would work with your team to actually work on it. then a user journey map, and this is where it's that new experience, right, with that new product. But my pet peeve, maybe you already spotted from previous videos, is that if you're mapping the new map, you probably should chart the territories of the existing experiences as well. So as you talked to Dave and as you talk to Emily, or multiple Daves and multiple Emilys, you should have come up with your existing approach to this, because we surely experienced that. We've been here for 6 months, right? So they surely have some sort of experience you can capture. Nothing is better than a map, however high level. What steps did they take? What's the issue? Things of that nature, because it's just very sudden jump from personas to problem statements. Give me a bit more, basically. And then on top of that, you can overlay the new steps. So, you know, the old journey maybe was not that rich. This is how you answer it with a new journey, and this is how you answer those issues. And then, you know, just take it on, basically, into the, like, further work, further definition, further ideation. And I'm glad you actually outlined for both, but, you know, it's just what's before that to inform these steps, basically. Different design features, refinements, and why. Clearly represented, I guess. You could maybe make it a bit more visual here, but this is your feature refinements and why, and I guess you took it from your map as well. But you could connect a little bit, I guess, so you have original idea, problem, refined idea, and whys. I guess there is a bit of a jump here as well, which you could kind of align on the definition of a goal from problem to solution for both. Again, maybe it would make sense to have a common goal right now after that, because, you know, you could keep it separate as well if it's two different distinct personas which require very distinct products. But then you could, you know, consider if you could prioritize Dave over Emily first for MVP, and then approach Emily once, you know, you have enough evidence and your product is running successfully, and, you know, you're just having your runway increase, so that, you know, you can reduce the cost of development, almost like a two tools or two sub-tools which live under one product. So you define our information architecture, deliverables, which I shown before, and it's a lot of time spent obviously in this, which is great. Not gonna go too deep into this, but you can see, you know, in the live stream as well, all the participants, how much time they spend on it. And they answer basically the specific goals, which is great that you connect it to the previous bit, but just consider how big is this undertaking to actually implement all of this. It's going to take a lot of time. So maybe the next step would be strategically break it down into smaller buckets to inform smaller sprints or something along those lines, or start with the sprints. And it's almost like why so many UXers tend to steer away from design thinking, is because you end up with so many big ideas, but then it's very hard to implement, because it's you know, various issues, of course, with depth, maybe it's issues of actual runway of implementation and what you have in terms of resources and things of that nature. That's why consultants usually do that. But, you know, how does that feed into actual projects, into actual agile scrums and the product design teams is a different question, because it's altogether different beast to actually implement all the ideas when just coming up with those ideas and defining it. So something to consider, because people might ask you about it, like how would you actually chunk this? Especially if you would apply for senior roles, I would be like, well, you designed a lot, but what's next? How are you going to implement it? You know, like even if I skipped, I don't know if you did user testing. No, you didn't, right? So I would definitely ask validation. I would definitely ask about, like, you know, how are you going to chunk it up? What's the roadmap would look like? What are your plans for it? Because you definitely are not going to just be able to immediately implement all of it. Like what's the MVP, what's post-MVP, things of that nature. And you're not just going to get that from myself, but also the product managers, let's say, and everyone who you potentially would work with. Just something to consider. I'm not saying you have to now go and remake this, but of course you can think about how to best structure this. Again, the validation, the user testing is a given. You definitely need to go out there and capture more insights about this. And the conclusion definitely could be less, I guess, it's great that you add a personal touch of your experience, but tell me the experience of actual users. That's what matters most. Tell me about estimated impact. Tell me about the desirability of a product once you engage with those users. Tell me about the next steps. Just like, let's say, Adam did in his, where he said, I'm going to do this and that, and so forth, all those different steps. You could literally outline that. Just do not end it like, this is done and dusted, because nothing is done and dusted ever. So there's a few different bits. I like your approach, though. I feel like there is a lot of different bits you can improve on here and there, but otherwise it's definitely shows that, there's a lot of time spent trying to unpack, deconstruct this challenge, and then work with it. Cool. I think we ran through it. Any comments from anyone on the stream? Any questions so far? I see one. Let me see. Dakota says, hey, this is Get Him Mama, the first case study you looked through. Bit late to the party, but thanks for the feedback. I have a lot of notes for you that I will take forward. Awesome. Thanks for joining. That was the first case study. You can just probably rewatch that at the start. Again, with everything like this, take the feedback with a grain of salt. I hope this is useful, though. Remus says, do you use green screen for the background? Yes, I do. I don't have a big screen behind me with with the chat rolling. It is just a green screen pull up, basically. So yeah. Anyone else? Anything else from people on the chat? Anyone else have any ideas on the next challenge? Any topics, any themes, anything's on your mind? Cool. All right. I feel like we're gonna wrap up here. Thanks so much. And this is surprising. I was planning to do this maybe in 45 minutes. We're already almost 2 hours in. Thanks so much for everyone tuning in. Again, for everyone who's rewatching, just because you didn't participate in this challenge, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't pick up that. That requirement or that challenge brief is going to live on that Miro board for quite some time. There's going to be a link down below, which you can click at any time, pick it up almost like a side project. You can at any point address it. You can learn from what's on this, all these case studies, all these tips, all these kind of thoughts, and comments as well from people on the chat. You can kind of learn from it and maybe make even better case study. Again, it's about your own development. You can invest how much time you want, but alongside other UX projects, other challenges, this is one of those ideas, which is like, when I get comments like, oh, I don't know what to do, I don't know what project to take on, how to come up with case studies, this is it. Just take this and do that. You don't have to wait for the next challenge. You can just take on what's there. That problem lives on, and it's probably going to live on for quite some time. So why not to solve it? Why not to document it? Why not to capture evidence and then make a case study and make your UX portfolio shine, and ultimately a tool which you can kind of bring to the conversation and say, hey, look at me, I'm worthy of this position. So anyhow, thanks so much. Let's wrap it here. I hope you're gonna have awesome weekends. And on that note, I'll see you next time.